Hello and welcome to today's video where we are going through some of the recent questions of the topic of performance, and I have prepared for today 7 different questions from across all different topics. So I'll try to give you some tips as well as the exam explanations for all of these. So let's jump without any further ado into question number 1. So if one runway has frost or snow covering less than 25% of its surface and another runway has more than 25% coverage, how would each runway be classified? So these definitions can actually be also found in the runway condition assessment matrix. And generally speaking, if more than 1/3 of the runway is covered in contamination, and this contamination is over 25%, then the runway is considered contaminated. Anything less than 25% is considered just wet. And here also one extra exam tip. Remember that if the coverage is less than 10% in all the reports, the meteorological reports, this will be stated as NR, not reported. So 0 and 10% will be not reported rather than wet or contaminated. So just something to keep in mind. Of course, if one runway has frost covering less than 25, the runway will just be wet. If it's more, then the runway can be considered contaminated. For question number 2, in the case of performance class alpha airplanes, why would you consider performing a derated takeoff on a contaminated runway? So this is also a good opportunity to just consider and revise the difference between derating and flexible takeoff. In the case of flexible takeoff, we trick the engines into thinking that it's hotter outside than it actually is, so the maximum power is limited. However, the toga or the takeoff power, takeoff governance power, is always available for the pilots. In case of derating the thrust, this is where we actually limit the maximum possible thrust. So in case of a derating the thrust, the maximum toga power will be limited to a certain value that we put in before. And this is a very important consideration, because when it comes to derating the thrust, something changes here massively, which is the thrust of the engines and the maximum thrust that we can get. And this can change the VMCG, the minimum control speed on the ground, because now when the engines are giving us less power, in that case, the asymmetry will be less, so we'll need slightly less opposing or yawing motion in order to counteract the possible engine failure. And this is a very important consideration. Sometimes in very remote cases, the VMCG can be a limiting factor for takeoffs, and in case of the derate, we actually can decrease this and increase our maximum takeoff weight if that is a limitation. So in the case of this question, the V1 can be lowered below VMCG. Absolutely not. This doesn't make much sense. New minimum control speeds can be established, which might lead to better takeoff performance. Absolutely yes, this is what we just discussed. And of course, the additional safety margin and maximum toga power can be selected at any time during takeoff. Like we just discussed, at a derating, this is not possible. However, when you're doing a flex takeoff, then you can always select the toga power. And now for question number 3. So a headwind component increasing with altitude as compared to zero wind condition has no effect on rate of climb, and this actually will be the correct answer. So remember that generally speaking, the wind the wind will never play a role when it comes to your rate of climb or angle of climb. So your Vx and your Vy will always be the same no matter the wind. The same is also true for the endurance of your aircraft. So no matter the wind, the endurance of your aircraft will always stay the same. However, the maximum range of course changes with the wind, and also the speeds for best endurance will be always the same. However, the speeds that give you the best range, of course, will change slightly. So if, for example, you want a good range in headwind, you want to fly a bit faster, and for better range in tailwind, you want to fly slightly slower. And this is also true for the exams, as there are some questions asking about exactly this. Also, here it's a good way to revise. Remember that Vx, because x has a lot of angles, is the best angle of climb speed, and your Vy, of course, is the your speed for the best rate of climb. And just for the rate of climb, the angle of climb consideration, of course, wind will change your climbing gradient over the ground. However, in the air, the gradient always stays the same. And for that reason, the rate of climb and best angle of climb will always be the same, no matter the wind conditions. On a dry runway, the accelerate stop distance is increased. Now the question is when? So for these cases, also remember that there are two different definitions that people often confuse in questions like this, which is your accelerate stop distance available and your accelerate stop distance required. So the accelerate stop distance available, of course, will not change. This is something that is assigned to a runway. This is something that's available for everyone, depending on if there is a stopway, if there is no stopway, etc. However, the accelerate stop distance required is something that we calculate with our performance calculations. This is something that will change from day to day, depending on the conditions and the state of the aircraft. And of course, there are many different implications. However, remember that your accelerate stop distance, it will actually increase if conditions are not favorable for you when it comes to the takeoff. In this case, there are three answers here that give you better performance and are favorable, and there is one that actually slows down your acceleration, meaning that you will reach your V1 speed at a later moment. So here, the answer by uphill slope, this will actually increase your accelerated stop distance needed. And the reason for this is that you will reach your V1 speed at a later point because the acceleration will take more time. In all other cases, the acceleration will be easier and faster, so you will actually need slightly less accelerated stop distance. And now for question number 5. So unless otherwise specified for Class B aircraft, when landing on a runway with downslope of 2%, the landing distance required should be increased by, and the answer here is 10%. So this is relatively straightforward. However, it's good to remember that this is always, you always need 5% for every 1% of the slope. And here we only take into account the unfavorable conditions. So if, for example, this was an upslope, we absolutely would not take this into condition and into our calculation. And then, of course, once we land, it would help us with the deceleration, but this is a little bit of a bonus. So in order to stay on the conservative side, we do not take this into account. All of these numbers can actually be found in the performance caps. So if they are available during the exams, feel free to go through them. Even now, actually, if you have them handy, open the page. It's always good to revise and take a look once every while. It will help you remember all of them, as the exams will often ask for different factors. For example, if for the wet runway, this will be 15% for the exam sake. However, there are many different ones that need to be remembered. And now for question number 6. So you forget the Mach setting to change the Mach setting to the IAS setting while descending at constant Mach number. So what will be the consequence? And this is a very interesting question, and this is quite a practical one. Of course, most aircraft, this will happen automatically. The aircraft at the changeover altitude will switch our primary reference into Mach or IAS, depending whether we're climbing or descending at a certain altitude. Because, of course, as we climb, for example, our main consideration is not stalling. However, it will be not reaching the MMO, the maximum operating Mach number, because as we climb with constant IAS, our Mach number constantly increases. So we need to be wary about this and make sure it doesn't increase to a dangerous level. When we're descending, however, the situation is reversed. So at some point, we do want to change to IAS. However, if you descend with constant Mach number, what will happen to your calibrated airspeed or your IAS, of course, with constant Mach and you descending, the CAS continues to increase. So the increased CAS also, the TAS will be increased, and this together will lead into an increased rate of descent. However, now there is a consideration of your pitch angle. So if you like the numbers, there is a very easy formula that you can remember, and that is for your gamma, so your descent angle, and that is your drag minus your thrust divided by the weight. So as you increase your CAS, of course, your drag will also be increased. So the excess drag increases, meaning your descent angle increases. And As your descent angle and your angle of attack, they increase, of course, as a consequence, your pitch angle will decrease, because the pitch angle decreases as it goes below the horizon more and more and more. So this is also a wording issue, so be wary that pitch angle decreasing means that your descent angle is actually increasing. So the rate of descent will increase because of the increase of calibrated and true airspeed, and as a consequence of this, the excess drag will increase, and with excess drag increased, your descent angle increases, so the pitch angle will increase. It will decrease below the horizon as a consequence. And now for the last question, so question number 7. How does the outside air temperature and pressure altitude affect the approach and landing climb performance of an airplane? So this is a very popular question that comes up on the exams very often. So of course, what you need to remember is that generally speaking, the aircraft performs better at low temperature and it performs better at low pressure altitudes. And the reason for this, of course, is that as you climb higher for the same CAS, your TAS increases. So you need higher speeds to reach higher true air speeds. And also, of course, the dynamic pressure over your wings, because of the air's density, will be greater the lower you are for lower air speeds. And the engines, as we already mentioned, for the same reasons, will produce higher thrusts at lower temperatures and lower pressure altitudes. So here, if you go for the questions with all these considerations in mind, you'll see that the worst performance will occur at a combination, of course, high outside temperature and high pressure altitude. This means that if you're high, you're actually a landing and climb performance will be the worst, because of course, first of all, you'll need you'll have higher true airspeed for the lower CAS, and your engines will produce slightly less thrust than they would at a lower temperature. And this will be everything for today's video. So I hope these questions were interesting for you, together with the explanations. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. We'll try to help and answer those. And if not, then I wish you a fantastic day. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. And I wish you all the best with your upcoming exams.